Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Awakening Podcast. The biggest and the most discussed news this week in China was the unexpected comment from the newly elected Japanese Prime Minister, Takeshi, which triggered a diplomatic crisis between China and Japan. This is roughly the timeline of the events, okay? On November 7th, the Japanese Prime Minister told the Japanese Parliament that in a scenario in which China used warships to force to bring Taiwan under its control, could constitutionally, Japanese constitutionally, okay, consider as a survival threatening situation for Japan. And this survival threatening situation she mentioned was explicitly referring to a legal threshold under Japanese 2015 security law, allowing the self-defense force of Japan to be deployed if Japan's existence is threatened. Now, previous Japanese prime ministers over the decades have occasionally mentioned something similar, but less direct and usually not so openly and bold. This is the first time a prime minister of Japan linked Japan's security directly to Taiwan's defense in such a way, all right? Immediately after the comment, China's foreign ministers called her remark to be outrageous and a serious interference to China's internal affairs, as expected. However, there's more. About 3 days ago, China's Consul General in Osaka, Japan, Xue Jin, posted on X a message responding to Takeshi's comment, and I quote, "The dirty head that stakes itself in must be cut off." Well, it's normal that this dirty head, by its context, is referring to the Prime Minister of Japan, which is a threat. Japan officially protested against Xue's post, calling it extremely inappropriate. They see it as the Chinese official placing threat to the head of state of Japan. Many Japanese even asked for the removal of Chinese consul in Japan for placing this statement, asking him to apologize for this and that. And the Chinese side, of course, also asked the Japanese side, the prime minister, to roll back her comment regarding Taiwan, which she refused. And, yada yada. There's a huge ongoing heated shouting match between the two nations right now, both through official channels and also social media. I think X kind of either ban or remove Xue Jin's message after that. In this video, I'm going to talk about this issue from a few different angles, okay? Starting from China and then on to Japan and finally to the United States. First, China. China's official network and the public is responding very aggressively in the ongoing situation. Chinese are making all kinds of creative statements, such as, here, let me show you. China unifying with Taiwan is by right and by law. If the Japanese gets involved, that will be considered a Japanese invasion of China. Then all our gloves will be off. This next comment, very cute. If China engage in a unification war with Taiwan, I will donate 1 week of my salary. If China engage in a war against the United States, I will donate 1 year of my salary. If China engage in a war against Japan, I will donate my life. Oh, there's a lot more to that. The Chinese are now talking about the island of Ryukyu, which historically speaking was an independent kingdom. After World War II, the United States took control of the island and maintained a huge military base there until today, Okinawa. I remember when I went to college here in the United States, I have friends and dormmates whose parents are from Okinawa military base, military servicemen. So the Chinese government argued that Okinawa should and the surrounding island should become sovereign nation again. There's an entire story. I don't want to go too into the detail here, but it is a way for the Chinese to pressure the Japanese and Americans to both stay out of Taiwan's business and also perhaps in the future to relocate the military base, since it is too close to China and to Taiwan. If a unification operation began, the Americans decided to get involved, it is certain that the military base will be used to assist Taiwan. So that will put the Japanese in a very awkward position because the island chain right now falls under the administration of the Japanese government. The anger the Chinese are expressing are expected and, in my opinion, almost necessary, actually. It is a way to signal to both the Japanese public and the Japanese government how serious this statement means for the Chinese and for the future relationship between the two countries, especially given the fact that the two countries has grudge, during World War II. Still only recent memories. If the Japanese Prime Minister continued to make such statement, even the Chinese government might not be able to suppress public sentiment in China. Things can turn very ugly very quickly. That's like, which is happening right now, German tanks rolling again in Ukraine against Russian troops. When it comes to Japan, which I'm quite familiar with the country, my family has been doing business with Japan for the last 40 years. The Chinese-Japanese relationship throughout the decades since World War II is very sensitive and fragile, okay? Due to historical reasons. From a culture standpoint, however, I think Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, we share similar political philosophy and protocols. We approach international relationship cautiously, and when we do make a statement, we put our credibility behind it. We do not act like Western politicians, kind of yapping all the time, saying vigorous things and making eyes-catching speeches and ended up not cashing in the check. This is just not how Chinese or Japanese approach politics. We are in general more composed. This Prime Minister of Japan was known to be a right-wing activist throughout his career, but usually we expect politicians to become more sensible and cautious when he or she landed in such an important position. This is definitely a big mistake she made. Or is it on purpose? It feels like there's an invisible hand pushing her, maybe. As we know, Japan is not a fully sovereign nation since World War II. It does not have a sizable military in relationship, to the size of its economy and population. And that's by constitution. Its security is outsourced to the United States. Is a de facto US security protectorate, a vassal state, many would like to call it. So it doesn't really have a meaningful military to match against the current Chinese army or navy. So saying something like that is quite irresponsible of her, even in active war zones such as Ukraine. It is one thing for neighboring Eastern European countries to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. It is totally another issue for a head of state of, let's say, Romania to say, Ukraine's right now under attack and we need to send in our men and equipment directly and join the war. That might not square well with your population, your people, especially when you do not have much of a military to begin with. Plus, since it's a de facto US security protectorate, the decision must be made by the United States. She is not really allowed to make such a statement unless, one, it wants to devassalize itself from the United States, or two, the United States actually given direction for her to say such thing, okay? Furthermore, Japan has deep economic ties with China, deeper than any other countries in this world, I would say. Its industrial supply chain is completely integrated with China, and many factories will cease production entirely if there's a major supply chain disruption with China. I mean, this economic integration is much, much more greater than that between Germany and Russia. So making such a statement out of nowhere is jeopardizing a lot of economic interest for not really much good reasons. Which then comes to the conclusion now, the invisible hand that is probably pushing this the United States. The deterioration of relationship between Japan and China served many goals for the US global interest and in this tense China-US competition. Now, I have brought this topic up several times in other videos here on my channel that the United States' goal is global strategy, is based on divide and conquer. It cannot stop completely economic integration between close neighbors, but it cannot allow too much, or else it becomes difficult to keep US sphere of influence over places, in this case like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. So in recent years, you can see violent struggle in internal politics in these regions and countries. A coup attempt in South Korea. In Japan, we have assassination of Shinzo Abe. Japan went through 4 prime ministers after that in just 4 years, not even 4 years. Taiwan government is in utter chaos, and the Philippines, at the blink of civil war at one point. In my opinion, this is the United States' goals to keep pro-US and anti-Chinese government in power, in which case it's somehow against business interests, and many also the public feels threatened in this case. For the United States, of course, in case of a real military confrontation, the first island chain would not break so easily if these regions and countries can be kept in check. There are many economic incentives as well here. The Japanese was originally not allowed to have its own industry after the defeat of World War II. But just like the Marshall Plan in Western Europe, the United States helped Japan to build up its manufacturing capacity during the Cold War to counter the communist Soviet influence. The Japanese, in my opinion, are brilliant and hardworking folks. Used this opportunity to build a wonderful and prosperous economy for themselves. However, from the perspective of the United States, it cannot allow anyone, including its allies, to condense too much power, economic strength in this case, in which it would threaten its global hegemonic position. So over the last several decades, it has used different strategies to limit and oppress the EU and also the Japanese through Plaza Accord, and indirectly support moving industries to other regions such as South Korea out from Japan, and then later on to Taiwan and also on to China. But now China has officially rebelled against this US global unipolar world empire. The United States is actively trying to suffer relationship, especially economic relationship of its allies with China. So crisis tensions need to be manufactured in order to help those countries to realize that doing business with China is very bad. Just like, in my opinion, blowing up Nord Stream is to help the Europeans, to help the Germans to realize that further integrating with Russia is very bad and not in their interest. Nothing to do with the Americans, of course, because building economic ties between people together and these countries being too close to each other is not in the interest of the United States. This is where I agree with Angela Merkel, which a few years ago I remember she said that after the Ukraine war, the Cold War was never over. I need to talk about political and sovereignty power in one of my future videos. It's worth going deeper into, all right? But in this case, countries like Japan, South Korea, they are more like nation state only by name, but in reality, they reflect the status of Soviet US satellites during the Cold War. Now, imagine if West Germany, okay, with NATO and US invades East Germany during the Cold War. Do you think Poland, being in the Warsaw States, has the right to say that? You know, I'm not going to be involved in this fight. You, Soviet Russia, can go fight that war with other Warsaw states. We Polish want to stay out of this one. None of our business. Do you think Poland at that time has the political right to say that? Or does that mean you are kind of rebelling against the Soviet, right? It is kind of the same here with Japan. Do you think the Japanese has the sovereign right to stay out of a US-China competition over Taiwan? Do you think that when the Americans are fighting the Chinese, or just in general, intensive competition, do you think the Japanese actually has the sovereign right to choose sides? Do you think they can refuse helping the US armies there with logistics and supplies, and can they refuse the US order when it commands Japanese ships into battle? Let me give you another scenario. Okay, very possible. Let's say China engage in a blockade of Taiwan to force Taiwan into a negotiation for unification. Do you think Japan really has the right to engage in a separate, independent negotiation with China regarding a safe passage of merchant ships in surrounding region of Taiwan? Because a lot of Japanese merchant ship, the imports of supplies and export of goods around the world, has to go through that area. Do you think Japan has the sovereign right to engage in such negotiation, saying that, okay, this is not my war, but I need to continue to trade with the rest of the world. Can you let my ships pass and, we won't get involved? I think this is a much more interesting question to discuss in this critical era of human history. Do you think today's Germany and Japan has the political sovereign right to choose its geopolitical alignment, or non-alignment, the right to stay neutral? Because Japan here pissed off kind of both Chinese and Americans during World War II, right? So it is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If the Japanese choose to side with the US and do its bidding, the Chinese will come down with and unleash, apocalyptic force onto Japan. If Japan choose to stay out, the Americans will be like, oh, you killed so many Americans during World War II, and we still treated you well and gave you what you have today. And you decide to turn on us when we kind of need you to help contain China. You want us to nuke you again or something? I mean, I don't blame so many, Japanese prime minister just gave up. There's barely any breathing space when it comes to geopolitics between the US and China, when it comes to Japan, Well, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoy it, and let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the next video.